Joe talks about Joe. And now, your host, Joe Slepsky.
Hey, Joe on Joe listeners, it's me, Joe Slepsky, and I'm back and you're back. This is the quarantine re-releases of our original tracks going back 4 years, and I hope you're enjoying these as much as I'm enjoying reliving them, warts and all. I think you can easily hear where I'm finding myself and finding what the show turned out to be, so I'm really happy to share these with you guys. Again, we pulled these back from behind the Patreon wall, and I wanted to make them available to everybody during this time to share and give and listen and have fun, especially because G.I. Joe's back on YouTube now. So, yeah, so I appreciate that. And you guys can always follow me at Joe on Joe Pod on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. Let me know what you think of some of these early episodes, how terrible they are, or how funny they are, or how awful they are. And we're starting recording back up again, so reach out to me. Let me know, joeandjoepod@gmail.com. Let me know if you want to join me for an episode. I believe we're going to jump into G.I. Joe Extreme very, very soon. So without any further ado, here is the OG track from Joe on Joe 4 years ago. Enjoy.
You are listening to the Joe on Joe podcast, the only podcast where Joe talks about Joe. And now, your host, Joe Slepsky.
Hello and welcome to the 9th episode of Joe on Joe, the only podcast where I, Joe Slepsky, talk about G.I. Joe. Get in your head about it. You can follow us on social media at Joe on Joe Pod, at Twitter and Facebook, and you can send me an email at joeonjoepod@gmail.com. And let me know what you want to hear on the show. If you're local out in LA, you want to guest star on the show, give me a holler. We are about to start the 4th episode of the second miniseries of Revenge of Cobra. The episode is titled Battle on the Roof of the World, which is a pretty wordy title, so let's dig into it.
Yo, Joe!
And we're off and running. This episode aired in September of 1984. From documents that I was able to piece together, it probably aired on September 13th, 1984.
G.I. Joe against Cobra, the enemy, fighting to save.
Big picture it here. It is not as exciting as the previous episode, but yet it's not as kind of slowed down as the other episode. It is definitely, there's not as much action as the second episode of the series, but there's a lot of good character stuff that I think kind of carries the episode through. So it's not a total loss. It's not disappointing like the second episode was. But we're about to get ready into the episode recap, and I'll join you on the other side of that.
Using a laser core, Destro activates the Weather Dominator. The Joe team repels a lightning attack, and the Weather Dominator explodes. G.I. Joe must recover the 3 parts, or all is lost. Lady J, Shipwreck, and Gung Ho lose their part of the Weather Dominator to Major Blood as an earthquake strikes. And now the 4th episode of G.I. Joe, The Revenge of Cobra.
So huge cliffhanger. The guys are falling down a chasm, and Lady J, acting faster than gravity apparently, throws her harpoon spear, and it casts a net which captures Gung Ho and Shipwreck on it. So they're safe, everyone's alive, but there's another earthquake coming, and the guys gotta get out of that pit. But so here comes Shipwreck and his very toyetic hook, which he's going to use to make basically a slingshot out of Lady J's net, and it really defies the laws of physics.
That was a little too close for me, Lady J.
It was very exciting,
Great
though.
for me. I
It
love
throws them
danger.
up to the top of the cavern, and they can have a good chuckle about the fact that they almost just died. Now, we're back at the Island of Death, the island where Storm Shadow and Spirit had gone onto the mainland while the guys are fighting on the outer ring.
Weather has cracked the Earth's crust. Molten lava is seeping up into the seawater. If we don't get out of here soon, we'll be boiled like chickens in a stew pot.
The whole Earth is basically just erupting all over them. Yeah, so there's Cutter. He's demanding some cover because, here's some nice smoke bombs coming out of the whale, while Baroness's group is kind of fighting against them. So there's not a lot of like movement action here. They're just standing there shooting at each other, and now there's smoke screens. So it's just like delaying tactics.
Party to the other side of the island! Something is causing the temperature to rise dangerously.
Exactly as I had hoped. Cobra and G.I. Joe are intent on outwitting each other.
And we see Zartan, who is riding in a submarine and who apparently planned on the water to boil itself and to get the two sides to kind of go at each other so that he could ride away in his submarine. I'm not sure here. It's weird because Zartan's at the island, and I guess he's making a play for this piece, but as you'll see later in the episode, he makes a play for another piece. So cut to Spirit and Storm Shadow, who have a friendly brotherly bond, or at least hey, we just saved ourselves. Now that we're both able, now we will fight like gentlemen, with warriors with honor. Not like gentlemen, really, but like warriors with honor, which is cool. So this, again, they give Spirit the relationship that Storm Shadow really had with him. Even it's funny, though, because it's not like Storm Shadow's real, or it's not like Spirit's really saying anything more than Snake Eyes would. But they fight, and they basically fight to a standstill.
To waste it on pointless combat. Agreed. Soon we will either use up what oxygen remains, or the sea will rise.
And so they see that they've only one choice, and that's to work together in order to save their lives and for any one person to get away with the piece of the Weather Dominator that they're fighting over. So now we've cut back to the desert, and Cobra making a pit stop. We're revisiting, if you remember, our friend Roadblock was wrapped up with Honolulu West. And Roadblock is trying to hatch a plan because he sees that they're heading towards the Cobra Temple, which brings me to another point. We have not seen Duke and Snake Eyes in 2 episodes, which points to the pacing problems that I think they have with this miniseries. It's almost like they wanted to recapture the beats from the first miniseries, but they didn't want to do it exactly. But the first miniseries, they kind of had everything planned out in a pretty good structure, where it would be, visiting each plot point at a relative, at a good pace and rhythm. Hit this note, hit that note. Show Duke being captured. Show go back to the Joes. Show Duke being captured again. In this case, they've just completely ignored the fact that Snake Eyes and Duke have been captured by Cobra this whole time. But now we're getting refreshed with it. And Destro is talking as if he is in charge, which, upsets Cobra.
Because unless we recover all 3 pieces of our Dominator and reassemble them before G.I. Joe, all of us will be finished.
Yeah, so Cobra Commander kind of reminds him what's happening.
We must now marshal our forces to wage the ultimate battle on the roof of the world.
And there's the titular line for the episode, and we cut to Storm Shadow and Spirit. They are under there's water in a cavern that's kind of squeezing all the air out, and Storm Shadow, or Spirit, it's all these S's, I keep getting confused. Spirit realizes that the current in the air must be being forced out one way, so that there must be a hole. So we should follow where the air is, and if we both, if we die, we die. If we don't, we don't. Either way, it's better than just dying standing there, is what they're saying. So they both work together, and they kind of hold on to this fragment, and the water whisks them away. And now we go to break.
G.I. Joe will return after these messages.
Today's File Card Spotlight is focusing on the infantry trooper, Grunt. Grunt, his file name is Robert W. Graves. His primary military specialty is the infantry. His secondary military specialty is the small arms armorer and the artillery coordinator. And he is originally from Columbus, Ohio. Shout out, Columbus. He is a grade E4. Now, he's familiar with all NATO and Warsaw Pact small arms, as well as domestic civilian arms. He graduated in advanced infantry training, finished in the top 10 of his class, qualified expert with the M14, 16, 19, 11A1, and he is, quote, Grunt is a highly motivated, systematic individual. He's a stand-up guy who doesn't blow his cool in a firefight. Now, if you think that file card sounds quite generic, you are not alone. Grunt, as per his namesake, is one of the blandest, most boring, most uninteresting characters Joe's ever produced. And, there's not a lot there. I'm kind of trying to cover some of the early Joes early on in the series because I can't think of an episode that featured Grunt, but he is the most generic of the generic Joes. He's got the full green body. His arms and his body were reused in multiple characters. Although he looks like, one of the cool things about his figure that they gave him is they gave him a receding hairline, which is really great. Because it's character. It's character on the figure. And if you want to know what Grunt looks like, he looks a little bit like the actor Michael Ironside. In the comics, Grunt, he was one of the earliest Joes. He was there for the rescue operation of Adele Burkhart and all that stuff. And he certainly was a player in the early issues. But then he kind of faded away. And they did do one of the cooler things with Grunt. They brought him back years into the run, like 60 issues or so into the run, and they showed that he had graduated past G.I. Joe, and I believe he left to become an engineer. So they gave him a life outside and past working for the Joes, which was a really rare thing. He did come back, if memory serves, he came back to consult on a few things, so occasionally he would show up, but that was the most interesting thing about him, is that they gave him the life after the Joes. But while he was a Joe, he's a stand-up loyal dude, You do what you got to do. For being one of the blandest of all the Joes, he has actually one of the most recognizable action figure cards of all time. His action figure is the one with the kind of generic-looking Joe Soldier running at the camera, with his M16 in his hand. And he's, head to toe green gear with the webbing and the generic green helmet on there. But it's that generic look that was used on a lot of the promotional stuff. So it wasn't, they weren't advertising with Snake Eyes a lot. It was like, here's G.I. Joe. This is what you think of when you think of G.I. Joe. A bunch of dudes, a bunch of grunts, doing their thing. So it's funny that he has definitely one of the most recognizable file cards for one of the most forgettable Joes. But we'll never forget you, Robert W. Graves. Wait. That's your damn right. Yes, Robert W. Graves. We'll never forget you, Grunt. And back to the show.
Now, back to G.I. Joe.
So we got Cobra and G.I. Joe still fighting on the atoll outside of the island. And there is a geyser, basically, of water that's about to erupt. And there they go. Spirit and Storm Shadow erupt with the piece of the Weather Dominator. And Storm Shadow, being a man of honor, since he saved his life, he grants him the Weather Dominator. But they both... so they had both agreed the next time they meet they're going to be enemies. But when Storm Shadow runs off, Spirit waves to him like a buddy. Like, hey, buddy, I'll see you later. Like, hey, man. All right. Now we got... a couple of Cobra water moccasins roll up, and Firefly with a bunch of Cobras start rock climbing in order to get at Spirit, who's there with Freedom, Noble Freedom. And they're about to get the piece of the Weather Dominator from him. Now that whole scene with the Weather Dominator and Storm Shadow, it's reminiscent of the Satellite Down episode that we will get to in the first few episodes of the regular series. Now, Zartan and the Dreadnoks are still on a submarine, and Zartan is happy that the Joes got their piece of the Weather Dominator, and now he explains why. If each team has a piece of the Weather Dominator, and if the Dreadnoks can go into the middle of it, with their third piece, then someone's going to pay them pretty handily for that piece of the Weather Dominator. He's kind of playing like Monopoly, you know? However, think about when you play Monopoly. If 3 people have, let's say, what is it? Illinois, Indiana, and what are the red ones? Illinois, Indiana, and the other one. If 3 people own them, the third party doesn't have any more power than the other ones. It's not until someone has 2 pieces that you having the third piece is really, really, really valuable to them. I don't know that it's exactly in Zartan's best interest for G.I. Joe to have a piece, because I feel like if Cobra has 2/3 of the monopoly, and G.I. Joe and the Dreadnoks can come back with 1/3 of the monopoly, Cobra's just that closer to, and the G.I. Joe would still want to buy it from him. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. I'm sorry. I just feel like no one's here played Monopoly, because when it's a toss-up, it's just really a toss-up, people. So Destro and Major Blood have landed at a glacier, which is where the final piece of the Dominator is at. They landed in that giant red Cobra-headed transport plane. And on the other side of the glacier, we see one of the coolest toys, the Snowcat. And we got Snow Job, and let's see, who do we got? Lady J, and I think Gung Ho is with him. Yeah, Gung Ho is with him, finally covering up his arms. And, Shipwreck's there. He apparently gets around, even though he just joined the team yesterday, literally. This was awesome. That there's these ancient tunnels that Snow Job brought toboggan sleds with, so they can go sledding through there. And I just remember digging the hell out of this scene. It was and I don't think this movie was out yet, but like the movie Goonies, when they went shooting down the water sled, basically any of that, like sliding through a tunnel with no control, whether it's Waters and the Goonies, or it's always exciting. I don't know why that is. So on a third part of the island, you see Zartan and the Dreadnoks rope climbing with a bunch of backpacks on their back, granted, but they're rope climbing up the side of the mountain. So everyone is trying to get to this piece, and they're all carrying backpacks, but they're just really backpacks. Keep this in mind. This is going to come into play later. The backpacks aren't much bigger than a normal backpack, and they're carrying them on their back. They claim that the winds are too heavy for helicopters to bring them in. However, we see Baroness flying over in the Warthogs and the Cobra Rattler, and she has got a sweet Cobra snake patterned helmet that is, I don't remember seeing again, while Destro and Major Blood are burrowing underneath in a that traditional kind of spiral burrower tunneler thing like they had in Total Recall. And I'm fascinated by those burrowing machines. I know that they're cartooned up for cartoons. Like they don't really work that way, but the fact that there are machines that do that just blows my mind. So here we go. It's the final piece of the Weather Dominator, and it looks like a giant kind of flashing hockey puck, which makes sense that it's sitting on ice. And Zartan and the Dreadnoks, they reach the top of their secret crevice, and they see their goal in sight. And now you see what was in their backpacks. The Dreadnoks were carrying complete motorcycles. You heard me correctly. The Dreadnoks were carrying motorcycles on their back and have now finished assembling full-on motorcycles. Tricycles, actually. Trikes. Well, no. Let's see. So there's a couple motorcycles and Zartan's on a trike. But either way, they had those things in their backpacks. So, listen, anything's possible, right? Maybe they have PIM particles. Maybe their backpacks are TARDISes, So now, of course, timing is what it is.
We each have one piece of the weather control device. Whoever gets that laser core gets the upper hand.
So Flint just, spelled it out for us. And to commercial.
G.I. Joe will return after these messages. Now, back to G.I. Joe.
Trample G.I. Joe, you fools! Crush them!
We left at a moment of, you thought everything was about to heat up with some action, and we have to cut away back to the Cobra Temple to catch up on Roadblock. This is another one of those moments where the energy's just not there in this episode, but there's cool character stuff, like Cobra Commander is always fun when he's acting the fool with his, leadership, and, we love Roadblock. We got to check in on Roadblock, but a lot of this is you want to see the action. Let's say you want to see the characters kind of through the action, and we just keep cutting away to a lot of speeches on this episode, and I don't know why that's not as satisfying. But here we go.
How did you get
Roadblock.
Go!
Beating on Cobra Commander again, very reminiscent of the movie when the two of them make their break.
Fight for freedom wherever there is trouble. G.I. Joe is here.
And there's a Roadblock getting very meta and giving us his rendition of the Joe theme song, which tells me that the theme song exists in their world, which is fantastic because that means someone's writing catchy theme music about like the military. It's great. Now here we go. Scrap Iron shows up, almost torches them with a flamethrower. And all the Cobra goons pummel on Roadblock. They capture Honolulu West.
These arrogant intruders have dared to shame me in the sacred confines of my own headquarters.
Yes, they dared, Cobra Commander, just like every other Joe you have. And finally, we're gonna get back to Duke and Snake Eyes.
Duke, Snake Eyes.
Here we go with a great reunion. Kind of a funky handshake. And remember, it was the 80s. Handshakes, very popular in the 80s. Handshakes, headbutting, lots of things going on in the 80s. And Duke meets Honolulu, possibly the last time we'll see Honolulu. I'm sure we visit her in the next episode. And Snake Eyes just silently stands there. And now we're going to get the Cobra Attack Program, which, if you played the Atari 2600 G.I. Joe, I think it was it just called G.I. Joe? And you had it was the one with the paddles, and you had the giant snake that ran overhead and shot missiles down, and you had to protect your Joes as they ran from bunker to bunker. These snakes looked a lot like that video game, which is kind of neat. Now, look closely, and the animation on their faces where they were being illuminated by the red and blue snakes, really cool. Really good-looking stuff. So now we're back to the ice. The Joes and the Cobras have all put ice skates on. Much like years later, Batman and Robin would do, and Batman and Robin, which is not a positive, and they are basically chasing the puck around, the piece of the weather dominator looks like a hockey puck. They're all skating around after it, but instead of using hockey sticks, they're using lasers to propel it like a hockey game, and it's kind of fun, kind of interesting. There's Baroness in her really crazy bat Cobra like Venom helmet, and she sees an opportunity because the weather had previously been stopping her from attacking. Remember, the Rattlers are vertical takeoff and landing, so they can kind of hover overhead, and the weather had stopped them from doing so. But now they can attack, and as they do, they shoot with their lasers, and flying by with their with the jet engines, they are now triggering avalanches. Storm Shadow saves Spirit.
Next we meet as enemies.
And now they're even. So now Storm Shadow scampers off and says, "Goodbye, Spirit." And they're still chasing after the hockey puck. And the Dreadnoks are about to make their move in their transportable motorcycles. They throw some suction cups, which all perfectly adhere to it. And they start dragging the puck around from the back of their bikes. And they take it right up the side of the mountain as if everyone else was paying attention. Joes can't risk shooting at them because now they're kind of in the mountains, so an avalanche would happen. And Zartan explains what's going on.
world belongs to one of you. The one with the greatest bank account.
Yeah. So again, it doesn't. I mean, it sort of doesn't make sense because they would still only have one piece of the Weather Dominator. It would make more sense if, like, say, Cobra had both pieces and Zartan basically got the piece and said, hey, G.I. Joe, why don't you give me a ton of money and I'll give it to you, then you're okay. So, I don't know. It's a fun, like a Mexican standoff that they set up, but it just doesn't make sense. So the Cobra escapes in the VTOL, and the Joes are making the break for a tunnel when an avalanche starts to fall, and Lady J warns them, and that's our episode.
G.I. Joe will return after these messages. In our next episode, both G.I. Joe and Cobra track down Zartan in the amusement park of terror. Storm Shadow infiltrates G.I. Joe headquarters, and Cobra and G.I. Joe clash in the ultimate battle, all in the next and final episode of G.I. Joe, The Revenge of Cobra.
So we got a lot to wrap up in the next episode. So thank you for joining us. Once again, really great character stuff in this one. It's not super slow, but it's not super exciting either. But overall, a fun, fast-moving, in-and-out episode. A good placeholder. Next week, I expect a real big wrap-up. And that's going to be all. Remember to find us on Facebook and Twitter, and give me a shout-out at joeandjoepod@gmail.com. And now you Joe, and Joeing's half the battle.